In this video, I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of ensuring correct white balance, exposure, and tonal distribution using Lightroom's Develop module basic panel sliders. Now the sliders are found over here in the right side panel under basic. Let me go ahead and close and open that so you can see them. It's right underneath the histogram. It's the first panel that you're going to find, and the reason it's the first panel is because this is where you start when you're working on your image. So I'm going to start up here, however, in the histogram, because I find the histogram to be very, very useful when I'm trying to determine what I'm going to do to a particular image. Now, of course, I can see the image here in the preview area, but up here, this is a graphical representation of all the tonal values and color in this particular image. So the values to the left, these are areas in the shadow or the darker part of the image. And over here to the right, it lightens up. So this is showing me that this image here has certain dark values and certain lighter values, and they're nicely distributed. If I looked at this histogram and saw everything bunched to the right, to the lighter side, I would know that it needs some work. Probably could see that also in the preview itself, but this is so accurate when you're looking at in this graphical form. Now, the other thing that's really cool about the histogram, not only does the histogram have useful information like the ISO, the focal length of your lens, the f-stop, and shutter speed, if you hold your cursor up above into the histogram itself, and let me go ahead and move my cursor to the left, you can see underneath now, instead of this camera EXIF data, the word blacks shows up. And what that does is it's telling me that if I click and drag to the left, I'm actually controlling the black point. And if you look down to the basic panel itself, to the black slider, you can see I'm moving the black slider as well. But I'm doing it directly from the histogram. So I'm going to come up back to the histogram and I'm going to move my cursor to the right. And now shadows, which is corresponding to the shadow area of the image. If I click and drag, I can work right off the histogram and change the shadows value. And I'm going to move to the right a little bit. Now we're moving the exposure slider, which is controlling mid-tone areas of the image. And to the right, we have highlights. And to the far right, whites. Now I'm going to explain all what these sliders do in more detail when I get down to the basic panel itself, but I just wanted you to see that you can go right into the histogram itself and work directly off the histogram. Now this is useful, let's say if you have the basic panel closed and you're working down here with the lens correction panel and you don't want to scroll back up to the basic panel, you can go right up to the histogram and do everything right there. So let me go ahead and open the basic panel back and let's reset all the values to their original setting. All right, so now I'm going to walk you through the basic panel itself. After looking at the histogram, we're going to move down here to the basic panel. And there's a reason why this basic panel is first. It's the first panel of all the panels that you see in the right side panels. And that's because this is where you start out. This is the first thing you're going to do to your image is work with the tonal color values and get them at least pretty close to perfect. You can always go back later and tweak them or fine tune them, but it's placed here at the top for a reason. So we're going to walk through the basic panel first, and within the basic panel itself, there's a certain order that we follow. So we're going to start at the very top, and under treatment, we have a choice between color and black and white, and we'll just keep it at color for now. And below that is the white balance controls, and that's where you start when you're working in the basic panel. Now let's walk through the white balance controls. I have to start off by saying that most digital cameras today do a pretty good job of getting the white balance correct. However, there's times when maybe you've set your camera improperly, or there's a mixture of different light sources, or you just want to creatively adjust the white balance to give the image a different feel. I always start over here at the presets. I'm going to click on that next to the WB. And if you have shot a raw file, if you've saved your image in the raw format, you're going to get all these various options here. If it's a JPEG, you'll only have basically two options. But if you shot raw, you have complete control over the white balance. And a lot of times I'll just cycle through and see what the different presets will do. This is as shot. This is how my camera saw it. If I select auto, you can see it's warmed up the image considerably. Now, daylight should probably do something similar. It's not quite as warm, but it definitely changed the look and feel of this image. And cloudy is going to make it even warmer, shade warmer still. Tungsten, fluorescent flash. Well, tungsten is going to be wacko. So is fluorescent, because this image was not shot under tungsten or fluorescent light, obviously. Flash should be pretty close to daylight. All right, so that's a good starting point. Just cycle your way through those different options. I'm going to go back up to as shot, and I want to show you two other ways you can change the white balance. One is pretty obvious. It's right here. It's the temperature slider. So if I move the temperature slider to the left, I'm going to cool down the image considerably. And look up at my histogram. You can see how that's reflecting the value change in the color temperature. Now, if I move the slider to the right, I can really warm up the image to the point where it's really too warm. Now, if I want to bring this back to where it was, to its default, I just double click on that little arrow in the middle and it'll go back to where it was. Tint, well, you can change the tint of the image by moving the slider to the left. Will give the whole image a green tint, and if you move it to the right, it's a magenta tint. I don't use the tint slider very much when I'm playing with white balance. I do that later for creative effect. Okay, so the third and final way of getting a white balance, a custom white balance, is to use this little tool that's sitting right here. Now, I can access the tool a couple ways. I can just click on it, and then it automatically appears when I move my cursor over the image area. I'm going to go ahead and put it back, or I can hit the W key. And I find hitting the W key is a useful way to access this white balance tool. Okay, so you can see now the tool is going to reflect the various areas that I hold the point over. Now I'm going to try to find a neutral area, neutral gray. So someplace right in here will give me that neutral target that I'm looking for. Before I click, I want to show you how you can customize this target tool. So I'm going to move my cursor down here to the toolbar, and I can change the scale. So if I move that to the right, you can see I'm really zooming in to a very tight point. This is a way of getting very precise neutral target. I'm going to go ahead and keep it back a little bit. I don't need quite as much precision here. And now when I click, when I place the cursor over a neutral target and click, it's going to adjust the white balance accordingly. And you can see it really warmed up the image a lot. Now, the other thing that just happened, it's going to be determined by another setting down here in the toolbar, is auto dismiss. Let me go ahead and select auto dismiss. Now, when I come up here and I click on another neutral target, it will apply the new white balance, but also it puts the tool back. A lot of times I really need to poke around to find the right neutral spot. Instead of having to hit the W key again and then coming back and clicking and then hitting the W key, poke around, find another point. If you deselect auto dismiss, it'll just stay there the whole time I'm just clicking away on different points, and it won't go back into its little socket there. All right, so that's how you can come up with a creative white balance or a more precise white balance. In this case, for me, I think there's a certain amount of aesthetics involved. I do like it warmer. So I'm going to go ahead and stay with this custom setting as opposed to the as shot setting. We're going to move on down to the other controls in the basic panel. Below white balance, you'll see tone and auto. So if you want Lightroom to just automatically come up with some values for you, select auto and see what happens. And sometimes that may be all you need to do. You can see that it's changed the various values, the exposure values. Just about every value has been changed except for blacks. And that may be enough, especially if you're in a hurry. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to hold down the Option Alt key and I'm going to reset the tone back to their default value. So I can walk through and customize these to the way I like them. So the first slider is the exposure slider. And these sliders are very intuitive. If you move the slider to the left, in this case, the exposure slider, it's moving the mid-tone areas to the left of the histogram, as you can see up there, darkening those values, but holding the ends, the darkest part of the image and the lightest part of the image as much as possible. It's working mostly just on the mid-tone values, and you can see that reflected up here in the histogram, and again in the image itself in the preview area. Now, if I move the slider to the right, it's going to lighten up those values. You can see it happening as I move the slider. So another way of adjusting this slider is you come over here and you see now my cursor, if I click on the number there, I can actually use the up and down keys on my keyboard to control that slider. And this can be very useful if you want to get very, very precise in your adjustments. And then another way to do it is to just hold your cursor over the number and you see the little double arrow appears there. You can slide it. I guess they call that a scrubber. And if you move it to the left and the right, we're moving those values as well, left and right, correspondingly. Now I'm going to double click on this little arrow in the slider and that'll bring it back to its neutral. So after you set a exposure value, and in this case I'm just going to leave it at its default setting, 0. After you come up with a proper exposure value, you work on contrast. So moving the contrast slider to the right, you can see the values move towards the positive values and the contrast is increased. And if I move the contrast slider to the left, the contrast is decreased. You can actually see this up in the histogram. The contrast, it's moving the luminance values between pixels. It's not affecting the color. It's just affecting luminance, brightness. And that's what gives the contrast the boost when you go to the right. And you can see that up in the histogram, how it opens it up, spreads it out, but holds the colors. And now decreases the contrast when you go to the left. Let's go ahead and double click on that and bring it back to its neutral or default. Okay, so now let's look at the highlight slider. Let me just step back for 1 second and describe something that Lightroom is doing under the hood. When Lightroom opens up a RAW file, it automatically applies a highlight recovery algorithm. And what that's doing is it's finding details that may not have been apparent in the highlight. They may have been blown out or too bright if you just view them on some other program. Lightroom has automatically applied a recovery to those highlights. So that's done now in the background. It used to be in previous versions of Lightroom that recovery slider was part of the basic panel, but now it's done automatically on import. So having said that, there's still controls over the highlights through this slider. So I can darken a highlight by moving that slider to the left, and yet it's not going to clip it. It's not going to lose highlight detail if I move to the left, or more importantly, if I move to the right with the highlights. It doesn't lose any of the detail. It's just brightening up those highlight areas and yet holding detail in the brightest parts of the image. So double clicking on that brings it back to its neutral. Now shadows is a really useful slider, at least in my opinion. Watch what happens when I move the shadow slider to the right. Look in the area, the trees, the dark areas. Watch how this opens up without affecting the rest of the image. It's just working on the darkest areas. It's kind of like a fill light just for the darkest areas of an image. And I just find that so useful for many of my pictures. I'm going to go ahead and keep that shadow set and the plus value there. So the white slider and the black slider, these are how you set new white points. And this is where you will get clipping and you will lose detail in your highlights or shadow areas if you go too far. Watch up at the histogram. I'm going to move the white slider to the right, and you can see by the histogram, the red line on the far right is telling me that I've brightened up the image so much that I'm now losing detail in a lot of the highlight areas. And I can see where that's actually happening by holding my cursor over that triangle at the top of the histogram. And all that area you see in red now, these are highlights that have been clipped. I've moved my white point so far over, I've brightened up that area so much that I've actually lost detail. So let me go ahead and bring that back down because I don't want that clipping. And the same thing with the black slider. If I move that to the left, I'm setting the black point farther to the left to the dark area, to the shadow area, and watch what happens when I hold my cursor up here in the histogram over that triangle. You can see I've lost the detail in those areas that you see on the image. So let me double click on that. But both these sliders can be very useful. Just be aware that you're going to lose detail if you go too far with them. Now I've gone over the presence settings in another video, but let me just really quickly go over them because they are part of the basic panel, and I do use all three of them quite frequently. Clarity, if I move the slider to the right, it's just boosting the midtone contrast. And if I move it to the left, it diffuses or softens the image. Put that back to its default setting. So vibrance, if I move it to the right, is going to increase the color saturation in the primary colors. If I move it to the left, it desaturates. And saturation is more of a global saturation of color when I move it to the right, and a global desaturation when I move it to the left. So at this point, I find it very useful to do a before and after look and just compare what I started with what I have now. And I can do that either by selecting this icon here or just hitting the Y key. And you can see I haven't done that much to the image, but it's just the little that I've done has really, I think, improved it. I've warmed it up with the white balance settings, and I've opened up the shadows here and the trees. So that's the basic panel. There are other more subtle controls found here under the tone curve and here under the HSL color B&W tabs. So the basic panel, this is where you're going to do your heavy lifting in Lightroom, and this should give you a good start.